This is actually kind of backwards a little bit from maybe how you do a lot of your other interviews, because really I don't run a music school, but you do. And so really I actually have questions for you about sort of how you operate things.
Welcome to the Piano Sensei Way. I'm your host, Clinton Pratt, and I'm here to help you master the art of running a successful piano teaching studio. Today, I'm happy to be talking with Jordan Thomas, and I will just ask him to introduce himself and tell us where you live and what you do. Hello, Jordan.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Jordan Thomas. I live in the southern Denver metro area. And well, of course, I suppose I teach piano lessons.
Great. And do you teach at a studio, at your home? What's the setup?
Actually, I do kind of an interesting mix of two things. I do probably 50% online lessons, and then I've also kind of tapped into the market of travel teaching. So I also travel around here in the Denver area, just to people's homes and stuff. I found out that there's actually quite a bit of a market for that, more than what I maybe thought there was.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and I just want to tell the audience that the reason we're talking now with Jordan is there was a Facebook post about running a multi-teacher music studio, and Jordan and I had a little discussion on there, and then we were like, hey, let's get on a online meeting and discuss it. And then while we were talking about that, I realized, wow, this is like a really good conversation. I should have recorded it. It could have been a podcast episode. So we're sort of doing a repeat conversation to help all you teachers who are listening. And just a reminder, we put this on YouTube as well. So if you want to see our lovely faces, just go to YouTube, The Piano Sensei Way.
This is actually kind of backwards a little bit from maybe how you do a lot of your other interviews, because really I don't run a music school, but you do. And so really I actually have questions for you about sort of how you operate things.
Yeah.
I guess before jumping like straight into that, I feel like it's important to kind of provide a brief amount of context to kind of where it is I'm coming in with some of these questions. So in short, for me anyway, I moved to Denver about 3 years ago. And when I first moved here, I didn't actually just open up my own studio and just start teaching people right away. I actually found that there was a local music school to me. And so I went to that local music school and applied there, got hired real quickly, and started working there. And there were a lot of things that I was really excited about with working at that music school, but I only ended up working there for about 6 months because there was just a variety of reasons that didn't feel sustainable to me as a teacher who was employed there. And it kind of ended up leaving sort of I guess, maybe bitter taste in my mouth is maybe the right way of saying it, in terms of just the business model of a music school. Because while that particular school, I'm a big open book about this, by the way, but while that particular school was paying me $25 an hour, that was their starting pay for all teachers. That sounded like a lot of money, except for two main factors, one of which was that the cost of living in Denver is very high. And so $25 doesn't maybe go as far as it does in other places in the country. But also, too, the teachers there were only paid for the time that was directly in front of students. And for a lot of reasons, I suppose that does make sense. But on the other hand, too, after about 6 months of teaching, I only had about like 15 students. And so that was coming out to like 7 hours a week of pay. And so it's like, sure, $25 an hour, but for 7 hours of work, that doesn't really do very much. But yet the music school had expectations of their teachers to always have all of their availability, so that way they can add more students to your schedule. And so I was just kind of left in a situation where it was any night of the week, I might have anywhere from 2 to 5 students. And it just seemed a little silly to me as a teacher to have to commit an entire evening when I can only put on sometimes 2 students on my schedule. So it kind of led me to believe that music schools don't have a good business model in order to pay their teachers very well without risk of closing their doors. Now, I want to say here that, I'm not like throwing the guy who ran that music school under the bus or anything. Like, I think he's a great guy, and I understand that, he's trying to just keep the lights on at his music school. And the fact that I understand that is kind of my issue with the model itself. Is if a music school wants to stay competitive in its area, it needs to be able to compete with the prices of a private studio owner as opposed to a music school. But if they charge the same as, say, what I charge now, then, they can't afford to really pay their teachers very well and also cover all of their overhead costs. So, I had a variety of things that, I wanted to see different in just the way that a music school is set up, but I'm not sure exactly how it works, which is kind of how we got into our conversation on Facebook about, is there a such thing as a good music school business model, basically, that sort of works well for both the studio owner and for the teachers. And it sounds like you seem to have a pretty good feeling about your own music school and how you run it and operate things with your own teachers. So I guess it kind of leads sort of into really just sort of like, the first question, which is maybe like the really big one, is just about like teacher pay, right? And, what is considered fair pay to, your staff, especially in the context of, what city you live in, because obviously you're not in Denver. So there's that change as well. But, how do you define that, and how do you provide incentive for your teachers to stay teaching at your school?
Yeah, it's a good question. So teacher pay, right? Obviously, like it should be agreeable to both sides, right? So it needs to be like an hourly rate that the teacher is happy with. And, I'm thinking about what you said with when you worked at the music school and you only had a couple students on an evening, so like you had to block out that evening to teach, but then if you only had 2 students or, even 1 hour or 2 hours, that's not going to cut it. At my studio, I try to fill up a teacher's schedule on one day, whatever their max is before I ask them to open up another day, right? So I'm not going to be like, okay, can you teach Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays? And then I give them like 1 student on Monday and 1 student on Tuesday, So that's part of it, is like make it worth it to them to like come in for the day or the evening or what it is. And another thing with the pay is what else is included, or like what other factors are there to consider, right? So a solo teacher by themselves charging, whatever, an hour per lesson, and they keep it all, versus they're going to go teach at a studio who's going to get their cut. But, at my studio, I do all the admin and the scheduling and the billing. Like I handle all of the business stuff. So the teachers just come in and teach. So to them, it's worth it to maybe get paid less than what they could charge on their own, because they're not dealing with any of that running the business type stuff. Now, some people like doing that, like me, which is why that's a good deal, right? Like I like doing that, and so I take that off their hands.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'll say that, after I did leave working for that school and I started teaching on my own, I actually found that I really enjoyed it as well. And I feel like we're maybe a bit of a rare breed in that regard, of people who actually enjoy some of the admin stuff. Which kind of has me sort of really into like, why it is that we're even talking about this in the first place. For myself anyway, just 6 months ago now, I just had so much demand as a teacher that I had to kind of pull all of like my own advertising off the table, just because I could not meet the demand that I was receiving here in Denver for a piano teacher. And I kind of came to the realization that like, if I want to make more money and do more with my work and reach more people, then I feel like the only way to do it is to do a music school. But now I'm stuck with a sort of moral crisis of, well, how do I run a music school, or how do I start a music school without falling into the same pitfalls that I felt like I was suffering from as a teacher at the music school that I was employed at just a few years ago. So, I come with these questions of like, how is it that, we can kind of balance some of these things? Now I know obviously every teacher has a different sort of life scenario, and what is a livable wage for one teacher is different versus another. And I guess I'm kind of curious just about like, your perspective on like what is considered the livable wage for, some other teachers.
Right. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing. Yeah. If you're a single parent with 3 kids and, like, oh my gosh, your living wage is different than, if you live with your spouse or something and you're both working and, right. And yeah, I do have to say, like, the teachers that work at my studio, none of them are full time. Some are only teaching.
What would you
one
define
day.
as full time?
I don't know. Actually, I don't know if it would be a number of hours. It would be maybe whatever that teacher thinks is all that they can handle, like, without any other job. I don't know. That's a good question, actually. We could probably do a whole episode on that. Because, yeah, I mean, most people define full time as like, 40 hours a week or 35 or 30. And then we know, like, with teaching, you do some work that's not the actual one-on-one lesson time, lesson planning and all that. Maybe you could divide it with hours, like 25 teaching hours or something.
I mean, I not that I have the answer. Obviously, I'm asking you the questions today, but I've given some thought to it too. And I mean, I just think about like I feel like what a lot of people, even on the Facebook, what they say is that they kind of reach sort of their max limit, usually somewhere between like 40 and 50 students. Which, if we assume that 40 to 50 students are all half-hour lessons, that only gets you to 20 to 25 hours of teaching hours. And I think that most people would agree that it's mentally exhausting to go beyond that limit. And so the idea of like, a school requiring you to do 40 hours and with the possibility of that equaling 80 students, I mean, I can't even imagine handling 80 students.
Yeah. No, me too. And yeah, I have to say that I actually don't teach any 30-minute lessons. Mine are all 45 or 60. And that definitely makes a difference, even if it's the same number of hours. Like you said, if it's 25 teaching hours, but that's 50 30-minute students versus it's 25 teaching hours, but it's 25 students. Yeah, that's the same number of hours, but it's, at least to me, way more manageable with fewer students. So that's another thing, and it's related to the pay and all that, is not just teaching 30-minute lessons. At my studio, we do like age 8 or 9 and under is 30 minutes. Most other people do 45 and a lot do 60. Yeah, so full time, I don't know, it might be defined by a combination of hours and students or something. But yeah, so back to the idea of teachers at my studio who are just teaching like 1 or 2 days a week. They're not like, not that it's not important, but they're not counting on their teaching at my studio as like their main income. Like, I would like them to, like I would like to have more full-time-ish type teachers, but I think it is feasible. Yeah. With the pay, the number of hours, plus like I'm handling all the admin stuff. Do you want to connect with other teachers in person? Do you want to learn new teaching strategies and explore outside the box approaches? Join us at the Creative Teaching Conference, a radical retreat to recharge and reinvigorate your teaching. This unique conference was started by me and my 2 friends and colleagues, Christopher Oil and Tony Parlapiano, back in the summer of 2022. All 3 of us had so many ideas we wanted to share, but instead of trying to get selected for an MTNA or NCKP conference, we created our own event. We each present a few workshops, but we also have guest presenters as well. Topics include improvisation, composition, student-led learning. You'll experience inspiring workshops on creative teaching strategies and creative performance ideas. Learn about different ways to structure lessons, such as online groups, memberships, and subscription models. We eat meals together and plan social time so you can connect with teachers from all over the country, forming new musical friendships that will last a lifetime. Mark your calendars for July 7 to 9, 2024 in Cincinnati, Ohio. Check out creativeteachingconference.com for more info. And then there are other benefits too that teachers might not realize until they get into it. Like at my studio, we have a really nice facility, like we have really nice pianos. That was one thing, like when I worked at some other places, I was in like a 4x6 room that like barely fit a piano that was out of tune and 60 years old, and and
You're describing the school that I taught at.
yeah. And so I thought, man, if I ever have a studio, I want my awesome Yamaha U1, and I want a lot of rooms so that we can move around because I do Eurythmics and all this stuff. So yeah, so
I will tell you, by the way, that like I did look a little bit just to see your studio, the Piano Sensei Way, the physical location online, because you had some pictures posted. And holy cow, I want to teach there. Like your rooms that your teachers get to teach in are awesome. Like I'm so impressed.
Right. Yeah, and that's the other thing, is like, okay, well, the tuition might be a little bit higher at my studio for clients to pay, but teachers are still fairly paid. Like they're very happy with their pay. It's probably higher than most other places in the area. But yeah, like the teachers get that benefit too, of like the atmosphere and the facilities. There's 2 pianos in every room because, it's really great to teach 2 pianos side by side so you can demonstrate and not have to go back and forth, all this stuff. My teachers, I know one of them, she's finishing her doctorate degree, so she'll stay and practice, and I don't care. It's fine. I don't make her like pay rent unless I guess we were at like max capacity and we had lessons at midnight, but like she'll stay till midnight sometimes practicing. Oh, can I stay and practice on the grand piano? Because we have a grand piano in the lobby. Like, yeah, of course, so she gets to like use the space, there's coffee and tea, it's cozy, all that stuff. So there's more benefits besides just, oh, I only get that per hour. I could charge twice that if I teach on my own. Okay, well, go ahead, you can, but you're not gonna have the facilities. Like, there's a lot to go into it, right? Rent and insurance and the electric and toilet paper adds up. Like, there's a lot that goes into it. And when I was just on the other side of the equation of teaching at a studio, I always thought, oh, I should get paid more. Like, I can't believe a big portion of the tuition goes to the school, but now that I'm owning the school, I'm like, oh yeah, it's because we have to like pay for everything.
Right. And I hope I don't sound like I'm diminishing the needs of a studio owner to keep the lights on and to keep toilet paper on the rolls for parents as they're waiting, right? Like I don't think any of the teachers that I got to work with at that school was upset with that, but it was just more like, well, how can we increase teacher pay here? Because unfortunately at that school, I was one of many teachers who was a rotating door. And so it caused an issue from my perspective that there was no consistency in the staffing there at that school because teachers would work there. They would take on X amount of students and then they would eventually have to leave because they just couldn't pay rent. And they also couldn't afford to have another job because it would then limit how many students they could take. And so it sounds to me, you already mentioned here that one way that you're able to kind of make your teacher satisfied is that you charge a higher tuition than maybe a lot of the schools or private teachers around you. So, I mean, like, has that been an issue at all for you to charge a higher amount of tuition? Does that deter a lot of people to go to other places?
I don't really know if it deters people because, I don't have like a scientific experiment, but I mean, I don't, how would I say this? Well, I offer free trial lessons to students. So they come, they don't have to pay anything. They get a tour. We talk about everything. I give them a little sample lesson and then I give them the info and this is how you enroll, etc. And we get about 90% of those enroll. The ones that don't, like, it's possible that it's because the cost is too high, but they've never told me that. In fact, I have some who they look at the price and they are shocked that it's low. So, and to me, I think it's high, like compared to other studios. Yeah, I was going to say too that teachers get raises. They can get a raise with no ceiling. In other words, like I don't say this is your pay and then it can increase, but you're going to max out at such and such. Because I know some studios do that. There's no ceiling. They can get raises. They actually earn raises by doing professional development. So it's up to them.
No, I love that for a couple of reasons. Because in my own school experience, there was a cap. They told me right in the interview. They said we start all teachers at $25 an hour, and our highest paid teacher can get up to $30 an hour. So like there was essentially a $5 ceiling, and there was no like rubric or expectation of like how to, go through a process of getting a raise. It was kind of just at the discretion of the school owner. So about 3 or 4 months in, the school owner came to me just in the hallway and said, "Oh, hey, by the way, I gave you $1.50 raise. You're making $26.50 an hour now because I just really appreciate you and your work so much." And while the sentiment was nice, $26.50 an hour doesn't really make a big difference when you're only working, again, 5 or 7 hours a week. So it was also kind of like, well, okay, thank you, I guess, but like I didn't have any control over it. I didn't do any professional development to earn it. I just had stuck around for 3 months. So I like that, there's some amount of professional development factor in terms of like kind of putting a little bit of power in the teacher's hands of if they want to pursue higher pay that they can. I think I can see why that would be a really good incentive for teachers to want to stay there. I also think too that, going back to one of the first things I said here today is that like I feel like the issue of how the business model works is that you're either stuck with you either need to charge more tuition to students in order to, pay your teachers well, or you simply aren't going to pay your teachers well at all. And so it sounds to me like you just have a higher tuition rate. And so that also is a factor in just sort of what you pay your teachers and making sure that they feel satisfied there. I don't want to stay. There's other questions I have here that aren't about pay, but just on one other thing here, I guess, just kind of related to this that I sort of wanted to ask is, kind of about like hiring teachers and when you're, talking with them and looking for the right candidate to come and fill a role that you need. When you're doing that, if you are like, let's go back to that option that you said earlier of single mom with 3 kids. But let's say that she is like a phenomenal pianist, like she is the candidate that you want. Do you feel like you're limiting yourself in terms of who it is that you can hire if you can't afford to pay her what she needs as a livable wage? And instead have to go and pick somebody else who, is instead in a different pool of candidates who is maybe not as great of a teacher, but, they're able to afford the pay because they live with a spouse and they have no kids, right? Situations like that.
Well, yeah, there's a couple things to consider. So I can be a little flexible, so like instead of just all new teachers start at such and such rate, it's like, well, I can offer this one more. But also, like I said, well, my studio isn't large enough to have full-time people right now. So, if somebody was like, oh, I want to teach at your studio, can I teach 30 hours a week? No. You know what I mean? So most teachers right now that I have and hire are teachers who are just looking for like 1 day or 2 days, or they have another job and they would like to transition to more teaching, so they're okay with gradual. I can't just give somebody 30 students. We're not that big of a school, So yeah, if I think of it hypothetically, like, okay, if we were big enough and we had lots of students coming where I could give a teacher 20 or 30 students within a month or something, whatever the teacher is seeking as far as pay, if the studio can afford to pay them what they want.
Yeah, I think the communication there is definitely an important factor, because like again, in my own experience, I was kind of told by the studio owner, he was like, well, the sky is the limit on how many students we can give you, like we'll just fill up your schedule was kind of the impression that I got. And when you say things like that, it makes you kind of feel like, oh, like they have a lot of students. And because I think this particular school, he said that at the time, this was years ago, he had about like 350 students, and he was projecting to cross 400 in the coming months. And so I was like, well, holy cow, like 400 students, like certainly like, they'll be able to fill up my schedule with at least 20 or 30. And for whatever reason, that never really happened. But it felt like there was a promise of that being a thing to be made. And so, it felt a little bit like the expectations didn't meet the reality in that kind of a situation, but had it instead been more of a, like what you just described of, well, we simply can't do that number of students like immediately, but as we grow, like and your availability becomes comparable to that, then sure.
Thank you for listening to the Piano Sensei Way. I decided to break this interview with Jordan into 2 parts because it was so packed with information. This seemed like a good place to pause because All of what you heard so far circled around teacher pay, whereas the second half goes into other aspects of running a studio, such as hiring teachers, training teachers, teacher autonomy, switching teachers, student-teacher communication, hiring an admin or assistant, and more about expanding your studio. Be sure to go to thepianosenseiway.com and enter your name and email to get notified when part 2 is released, or depending on when you're listening to this episode, might already be out. Please leave a review for the podcast, and I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the podcast page or on the YouTube video, or send me a message. You can do everything at thepianosenseiway.com. Take care.